up, my foodie friends of YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for joining me once again. Now, you may have noticed that I am in an apron today, and that's because we're actually going to be doing some work over on the stove. I'm going to teach you guys how to pan sear some meat. Specifically for today, it's going to be pork chops because, well, that's what I'm having for dinner. But of course, guys, before we get into it, you know I got to get all the boring shit out of the way. So, if you're new here, do me a favor. If you like what I'm doing, think about hitting that subscribe button, maybe tickling the like button a little bit, and pass it on with your friends, share that. Maybe you know somebody who needs to learn how to cook a little bit. Turn them on over here. Alright, now enough of all that boring BS. Let's get on with today's video because that's why you're really here. Hey, you guys got a little close there after that last cut. But that's alright because I actually need you a little bit more over here so you can see what I'm doing so I can show you what I'm talking about. Now, the very first thing you want to do when you're getting ready to make food, especially if you're going pan sear to oven, which is what we're doing today, alright, you got to make sure that you've got your oven preset. Now, I don't know if you can see the temperature on my oven back here, but I've got it set for 400. That is important. I want it nice and high because I actually like to go straight from searing into the oven, and I want to keep that heat because I want the pork to cook as fast as possible. You don't want to lose any of that cooking time. That can really dry out the meat. It can mess with the flavor. You really just want to go straight into the oven, and if you can go with the pan that you're using, that's even better. I actually happen to be using a cast iron pan today, which you will see in a minute. Well, no, that was a pretty quick minute, wasn't it? Now, as you can see, I've got my cast iron pan here, and I've got my rice pot actually in the back ready to go. I'm going to turn them both on because I got to kind of get the rice going too. No, before you ask, I did not make this rice from scratch today. I actually bought this. I'm not going to tell you the brand name though because they don't pay me to, but I will say that it rhymes with store, which is convenient because that's exactly where I got it. I promise though we will do a video where I show you guys how to make rice. Alright guys, so we got our cast iron pan over here getting hot. We're going to go back over to the other side here, the counter that you're used to seeing, so we can season our pork. Now guys, seasoning meat is one of the most important things you can do whenever you're making a meal. Some people, like my wife, tend to forget that you need to season your protein. Always season your protein. Even if you're doing barbecue outside, if you're breading it, it doesn't matter. Always season the protein directly, even if it's just with a little bit of salt and pepper before you put on whatever else you're going to put on. The reason you do that is it's going to really help bring all the flavors together. It's also going to help pull some of that natural flavor, enhance some of that natural flavor from your proteins. Now, you can just use salt and pepper, like I said. You can make a mix of things. I actually tend to make my own seasonings. This one, as all of mine are, is based with salt and pepper, but it's got other stuff in there too, garlic powder, onion powder, yada yada. I'm not going to give you the whole recipe. That is for you to decide however you want your food to taste like. This one is specified for me, for my pork chops, the way that we like them. I will say, if I'm doing a pork loin, I tend to use more fresh stuff than dried stuff, but in this case with pork chops, dried is fine, especially since we are pan searing them. Alright guys, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to mix our seasoning all up. We're going to make sure that it's good and mixed so we get a good amount of everything that's in there. And we're going to sprinkle it on one side. Alright. You want to make sure you get it on there good too. Don't be afraid to get that seasoning in there, especially if it's the only thing you're putting on it. If you're not using like breading or anything like that, if you're just going straight with the seasoning on the pork or on your protein, then you definitely want to make sure you get a good amount on there, okay? It's not going to hurt it. Now, don't go crazy, especially if you got a lot of salt. You don't want it over salty. That is very easy to do. The pork is a very sweet meat. It's easy to over salt, all right? Don't want to do that. Now, if you see what I'm doing here, I'm just kind of patting in the seasoning a little bit. It's not something you have to do. It's not necessary. It's just something I like to do. Makes me feel better, you know, really get the seasoning to stick to the meat there. Now, let's go check on our pan. Alright, it feels to be like there's a good temperature coming off of our pan. What we're going to do now is we're going to put a little splash of oil on there. That's going to help keep our meat from sticking to the pan. Now, I'm using cast iron, so you got to be really careful. That's why I've got this kitchen towel here. Cast iron gets really, really hot, but it is one of my favorite things to cook with simply because it imbibes so much flavor, and it really helps with the flavor of the things that you're cooking. Now that our pan is nice and hot and lubricated with some olive oil, we're going to take our pork chops and we're going to lay one side right down on the pan. You hear that sizzle? That's what you want. That's how you know that that's going to sear in those juices. And that is really what you're going for here when you are pan searing food, is you want to sear in those juices. You want to get them to stay in there, and you want to get that flavor to really take hold. Alright guys, now our meat has been searing for about a good minute or two. And take a look at that. You see that right there? Nice golden brown. That's what you're looking for. So we're going to go ahead and flip these over. Okay? We're going to grab our trusty kitchen towel, because you don't want to burn your hands on this pan. Alright? We're going to open the oven and we're going to slide this right in. Now here's a little tip for you after you get your pork in the oven. I like to put a little pat of butter on there, about a tablespoon or so on each piece. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on the thickness of the pork chop. But that's going to really help enhance the flavors of the meat, the flavors of the seasonings that you put on there, and it's also going to really help keep it nice and juicy so it doesn't dry out. Alright guys, so we've got our butter pads on, and the pork is officially in the oven. So guys, as you can see, all in all, pan-searing meat is really not that hard. The important things to remember is to season your meat all of the time. All of the time, season your meat. And when you sear it, you want to make sure that the first side to touch the pan is the presentation side and that it is nice and golden brown before you turn it over. Pork really only needs to cook to about 140, 145 degrees. They recommend 145. I usually pull at 140. Let it carry over cook, especially when I'm doing in the cast iron there, because that's going to put a lot of heat. You let it carry over cook a little bit to come up to temperature. That way you're not losing any of the juices, you're not losing any of that nice sweetness from the pork, and you're not losing any of the flavor either. And that's it for today's lesson, guys. I hope that you found it useful. I hope you learned something today. If you did, please consider hitting that like button, giving it a little tickle for me. And if it's your first time here and you like what I do, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends to help the channel grow. Until next time, guys, I gotta get back to cooking, so let's get weird.